Welcome to Identity Center Live. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey Jeff, how are you?
Ooh, not so bad. Yourself?
Good, good. Just enjoying a little bit of time off. Um, Obviously, we're in between the Christmas and New Year's holiday. That's the beauty of streaming live is that we can actually say that versus when we're doing our recorded audio only podcast. We never know when it's going to air, or sometimes we know, but it's usually well in advance. So it's been nice having some time off, and in the southeast here, it's been plenty warm. How's the weather been there in Chicago?
Yeah, we actually got our first measurable snowfall yesterday. I'd say we got like maybe an inch, inch and a half or so. Kind of slushy, but most of it has kind of melted, at least on the streets at this point. But I think this sets a record for Chicago area. We didn't see any measurable snowfall until after Christmas. So hooray
Wow.
for that, I guess.
I was going to ask you what the temperature is, and it's kind of a trick question, but what is your temperature?
Well, according to my watch, 30 degrees in the Fahrenheit scale is what we're looking at right now. So it's almost we're boarding on the edge of short season at this point for Chicagoans.
So I'm proud of you. You kind of passed the trick question, which was designed to see if you were going to recognize that the whole world is not on the Fahrenheit scale. So while you didn't provide the conversion, which is roughly 0 degrees or one below zero, you did at least recognize that not the whole world follows Fahrenheit.
Yeah, this is true. As much as we like to think we're the center of the universe, that is not true. One of the few countries still on the imperial system instead of metric, but this is not
Yeah.
the metric show. This is our weekly live stream conversation where when we can talk about current events, just some of the interesting things that you and I kind of deal with on a weekly basis, kind of up more close and personal. People can certainly comment if you're watching on YouTube Live, that sort of thing. But really from an identity and access management point of view. So, like you said before, when we talk about the podcasts, usually we're a couple weeks kind of in advance of recording those. We try to keep it relatively consistent, but sometimes things pop up in the news that we just can't get to on the podcast in a timely manner, and that's our goal here.
Yeah, one of the things that's been interesting I've been watching this week. I mean, this is a low news week, a low work week. So I've gotten caught up on some of my favorite news shows, or I don't even know if they're my favorite news shows, but they seem to at least be something new to watch. And one of the things I've been watching is, a lot of the people are obviously working from home. So these are folks that normally are in the studio together, and all of a sudden they're on like different screens, kind of like what we're doing here. We're from home, and we both have backgrounds, right? And we both have the
The latest in
information behind.
technology.
Yeah, the latest in technology. We've got green screens going, and just starting to train ourselves to look into the camera versus, especially for me, it's like I look all around and
Yeah.
I look into the corner when I'm thinking, or trying to be creative, and trying to get more used to engaging, looking at the camera and watching these professional news people do it. And sometimes it's, a few of them go off and look into space as well.
Mhm. Well, I think that's just natural, right? I mean, we're human beings. Like, we're not polished television presenters. We don't have, at least I don't have a teleprompter yet. I don't know if that would necessarily help us because we are not reading from a script, right? This is just a conversation, and I'm okay with looking around the screen. I'm trying to control the stream and make sure everything's okay and things like that. So who cares about that kind of stuff as long as people find it either educational, entertaining, or ideally both. That's all that really matters.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as people hit like, subscribe,
Yep.
and notify.
Yep, exactly. That certainly helps us out a lot. Make sure that people, we're putting out content that people want to see. But why don't we start with our weeks? I know you mentioned it's kind of a light week. This is where all the real work gets done between Christmas and New Year's when nobody's in the office. So,
Yeah.
anything that you worked on in the last week or so that was interesting?
I mean, I don't know how interesting this is, but the one thing that I was working on this week was a reference architecture where I was taking one of our clients' customer IAM and enterprise IAM environments and trying to turn it into one reference architecture. And at the same time, stay true to certain principles, such as, the customer IAM and the enterprise IAM environment should be, as physically separate as possible. The accounts should not be commingled. The configuration should not be commingled. I mean, in the traditional IAM world, before everything was, moving toward the cloud, you'd have completely physically separate architectures. Now you might be leveraging the same cloud provider, so that physical separation is still more of a virtual thing, but at least you want to have some boundaries around those two different environments. Now, in this case, where I'm merging these two architectures together, I had to try to come up with a way to represent that they're still, virtually or physically separate, however you want to look at it, but at the same time, they're part of the same whole.
I think what makes it challenging sometimes too is if you're leveraging the same technologies for both, which may or may not be the case. Could be more like an identity source, maybe even an authentication platform that might have kind of shared duty, things like that. So it's always tricky, I think. So yeah, good luck with that.
I had another fun one, which was working with a client who, as part of our process, we start with the discovery mode, and it's like, what are all the applications that you have, right? We want to understand what is your scope.
And they always know, right? There's always a great list, and here's all the detailed information, and we never have to worry about that.
No, that's exactly not true. But in this case, the person I was speaking with had a list of, he said, 500 applications. And I said, well, here's the good news. We're working on a strategy. So the more the merrier, right? It's not like we have to integrate all 500 applications as part of this project. Let's get the information now, because if we don't know, we may have a blind spot.
Yep.
Or we will have a blind spot. So get it in there. The more the merrier at this point in the game.
Well, I think that's why I like the strategy side of things so much more than the implementation, is because you can think big, and really what you want to do is distill that 500 apps into 2 or 3 different methods for integration, right? You don't want to have 500 different ways to integrate. So let's come up with a common, consistent approach, right, to integrating those into single sign-on or into identity governance or privilege access management, whatever it looks like. There's a lot of different ways to kind of skin that cat, but
that's right. That's a great point.
I mean, I haven't worked on anything interesting myself because I'm still on vacation technically. So other than, billing and invoice things, that's pretty much been my world. But I know we want to try to keep these short too. So maybe we should shift over to a news article that I actually saw this morning that I thought was pretty interesting. And that was around the ways that ransomware negotiations work. So hopefully people can kind of see that okay. But this is from CSO Online, and I think ransomware has gotten a lot of different play, obviously for this reason, throughout the year with companies getting breached, et cetera. But what I think maybe a lot of people don't know is kind of what happens behind the scenes when something like this happens. What are the steps that go involved? I'm not going to read it because it is a relatively decent length article, but what I want to scroll down to here is kind of the first steps. And it's really starts with, okay, how do people get in, right? Make sure that those holes are closed so you can actually start, getting people off the network, and then making sure kind of who it is you're dealing with, what's the variant of ransomware, what's been affected, things like that. And then some of the steps that go involved around, notifying law enforcement, getting the forensic people involved, covering the investigation. How do you notify people that you've been breached? And then how do you make contact? I thought this last one was interesting around making sure that, or at least understanding the contact with the insurance carrier to notify them about the attack and get approval for costs, including counsel, forensic, crisis communications, anything else that's required, including the ransom. So I guess I hadn't really thought about this before when I read this article was, hey, I'm going to pay ransomware theoretically to this attacker. Insurance carrier, are you okay with that? I don't know how that's supposed to work. I think the insurance carrier is going to, look at that and say, okay, well, why are we paying? Do you have the appropriate controls in place? Things like that. But I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, which I guess makes sense. And maybe it's part of the due diligence or requirements that a company has if they get breached to notify their cyber, risk insurance. But thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's one of those sticky areas with insurance, whether or not they're going to cover it. I think the biggest thing that organizations need to do is the preparation in advance of being in this situation. Because if you read this article, what's really interesting is like, depending on X, depending on Y, and the dependings on, number one has to do with, um, do you have good backups?
Hmm.
Do you have
Yeah, and
backups that you can rely
have
on?
they not been compromised? Right.
Yeah, and have they not been compromised or destroyed? And this is something we've talked about on the audio podcast a million times, which is you need to have good backups that don't get destroyed. Um, the other one of the other depends on is were you able to stop the breach in its tracks? So do you have good ways to monitor that attacks are underway and start to stop them and contain them and then kick the person out of your network and stop them from coming back in? If you can limit the damage, that's going to limit your vulnerability in terms of having to pay a ransom to get back in business.
Yep.
And then the last thing is, kind of where the article starts, which is talking about how prepared were you in terms of are you now running around like a chicken without a head, or did you have an incident response plan that perhaps you even rehearsed going through? I mean, we always, even in smaller organizations, I think they have disaster recovery plans or business continuity plans. So they have some um, thought ahead that if this thing happens, how are we going to respond to it? I don't know that many organizations have gotten very far in terms of doing that type of planning if they are attacked for cyber with a cyber attack, but it's certainly something that I think is high enough likelihood that it merits doing. The biggest problem is that ransomware has kind of um, I don't know if it's shifted downstream, but probably the easiest targets are small to mid-sized enterprises. 50-person company, 100-person company, 1,000-person company, because they have a limited IT staff who are trying to keep the lights on, trying to do their best, and things like incident response planning and having offline backups. Those are things that are, more turn out to be nice to haves, and they are the most vulnerable to being attacked. And now the downside of that, if you're from the attacker's point of view, is they also have the least money to pay out. So if
Hmm.
you can attack and breach a major enterprise, a large scale enterprise, um, that makes you happy, because if you can own their Active Directory, you're going to get paid, or you have a good likelihood to get paid. Whereas if you breach a smaller actor, a smaller business, you're probably less likely to get paid.
Less likely to get paid, but could be catastrophic for also the business itself, right? They might just decide, hey, it's not even worth recovering. We're done. We're going to shut the doors
Yeah.
and be done with it. I know we're running short on time, but we did have a question come in from Andrew. Let me add this here to the screen, which, boy, that's terrible formatting. I'll have to work on that. But the question for folks who can't read it is, hey, Jim and Jeff, what are your thoughts on the supposed LastPass breach? Do you think people are on edge? People blow it out of proportion before all the info comes out. I think this is referencing the news that came out, I think it was last night, that people started to get email notifications from LastPass that their master password had been breached, which is bad news, because if you think, so the way LastPass works is it's a password vault. It's typically online, but can also be in your browser, whatever it may be, and it's secured through one master password. You can enable MFA on your account. Hopefully, people who are smart enough to use a password manager have also enabled MFA. But I think this is a little bit of concern for people to say, okay, how do we account for that sort of thing to make sure that those accounts have not been breached? So I think I'm cautiously optimistic that it is a relatively small portion. I used to be a LastPass customer. I no longer am. I switched to a different one, but I have not received an email indicating that my account was breached. And I think this goes back to, if you're going to use a password manager, make sure you're not using the same password for your password manager as your other passwords. Have it be something completely different and don't use it. I think it sounds to me, Andrew, when I was reading this, that it was a little more targeted maybe on a certain area. So I'm not sure. I think it's still relatively new. I think it's something to keep an eye on. I think it does enforce the need, though, to follow good password rules and hygiene. Stronger password, MFA for sure on your, keys of the castle, so to speak. Jim, any thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, you nailed it. You said everything that needed to be said. MFA for sure. And thanks for tuning in, Andrew. I mean, I know you've been one of the big fans of our audio podcast, and glad to have you here on the live stream as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So, I think with that, we're going to go ahead and call it for this week. I know we want to keep these relatively short, somewhere around 15 minutes or so, and I think we're at that mark. So, I think we'll do that here. If you like the show, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, like it, subscribe it, hit the notify buttons, when we go live. The schedule will probably change from week to week just based on kind of our availability to kind of hop on stream quick. But that's kind of where we're at now. And you can always visit the show at idacpodcast.com or on Twitter at idacpodcast. And with that, Happy New Year to everyone. This is our last show for the stream, and thank you so much again, Andrew. Happy holidays to you and your family as well. And Jim, any final words before we wrap it up?
I think next week's episode we're planning on doing the same day, same time, right?
I think so. Yes, I don't remember, but
I didn't mean to put
hit
you
that
on the
notify
spot
button
there, but I think that's right. Yeah, hit the notify button, then you won't have to worry about missing out.
Yeah, exactly. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and call it for this week. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this, and we'll catch you all in the next one.